Okay. So I think maybe people on the Zoom call can hear us, but the browser is still saying preparing to live stream the meeting. So we're not on YouTube. Uh, but
Hello to
welcome.
people in Zoom then.
What's that? Welcome to the people in Zoom. Yes, that's exactly the way I would have put it.
We
Um,
are now on YouTube because I started hearing your voice in my headphones
okay,
twice.
good. Well, then this is now the inauguration of the first ever Nonzero slash Psychopolitica joint live stream. Um, and you're Nikita Petrov, as you know, publisher of Psychopolitica. I'm Robert Wright, as I know, publisher of Nonzero Newsletter. And one irony here, Nikita, which you may be aware of, is that if you looked at our newsletters, you might not, at a superficial level, see an obvious big commonality that would explain why we're talking to each other. But if you took a deeper look, you would still not see any obvious commonality. However, there must be some reason we're here together. And part of it is our intertwined past, and part of it is I think there is some kind of overlap for our sensibilities that maybe we'll get to. Um, Also, there's something about your approach to a newsletter that I would kind of like to adopt, and maybe I'll get to that. And of course, we'll get to questions, comments from people who are with us on Zoom. Thanks to them, and we'll explain how to do that. Well, we might as well explain now, I guess, before you launch into whatever you're going to launch into. I mean, maybe you could, for example, explain how we came to know each other, but you tell me. Should we give the highly complicated instructions? Uh,
Yes, we should.
they're super complicated. There's a hand raising icon that you should see if you're on Zoom. You can click it. You may ask, what if you're watching on YouTube? The answer is smash the like button, right, Nikita? Smash the like. Isn't that
You
what
really
they
like
say
that
in the live
smash.
streaming business?
You
Smash.
really you really settled on the word smash for this
They
phrase.
always say that. All the professionals say smash.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to become a professional. So, take it away, Nikita.
Well, so the race we should was that clear? So in the bottom, in the bed. Oh, people are saying my sweater is nice. This is the
Well, they
first.
use the word sick, and that's actually kind of ambiguous to my generation. So I just wouldn't get ahead of myself here in interpreting these things.
This is the first piece of clothing that I've ever owned that people comment on and compliment me. It's kind of spooky.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
this
like,
my
what is
wife gave
this?
it to
What
me.
is this? Chopped liver? Huh? It's an LL Bean vest. It's like Jeff Bezos wears one of these, and I don't get a compliment. Sorry. Go ahead.
So if somebody does want to ask a question or chime in or whatever, they need to click on that raise hand button in the bottom line in Zoom, and then we would need to click another button to actually make that happen. On our paths being intertwined, I was actually thinking about it recently. I don't think I've ever properly expressed my gratitude to you because you played a major role in my kind of life trajectory. Because when I started working with you, that was the end of my office jobs. It was the end of like having to work for a company that you like, basically the end of jobs in the
Mm-hmm.
way that I used to think about them.
Working at
And
places where you can't dress the way you're dressed now.
that's
That came
that's
to an
right.
end.
I mean, more than that, like working with you and then now working with Glenn.
This is Glenn
Like I
Lowry.
remember this is Glenn Lowry. Yeah, I remember there have been multiple work meetings that started with me saying, I recently did this kind of drug, and this is what I thought about, and I want to discuss this now in the professional setting. That never happened at previous jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually became kind of like, I think many of the important kind of ideas that we actually acted upon came out this way. So I'm way more free now than I was before we started collaborating some
Mm-hmm.
7 years ago or something. It was It
Amazing.
must have been. It must have been. It was 2016 because I remember that I was still in the U.S. and Trump was still a candidate, not even the presidential candidate, a candidate in the Republican primaries. I remember the Rolling Stone cover that I saw at a store that had his portrait and the phrase "taking Trump seriously," and I remember that people's reactions to that cover were like, "Probably shouldn't."
Yeah.
People were still thinking this is not a serious endeavor.
Were they ever wrong? Yeah. You initially actually applied for a job I didn't give you. There was only one of them. It's a long story, but you sent this great like video you'd done. Do you remember this YouTube you did that? I don't know. It
Absolutely.
was like successive. It was like claymation except painting. You did these successive things, and it anyway, it had this vodka in it. And I thought, like, do I want to hire a Russian guy who's already like showing me vodka bottles? That I don't know. Anyway,
It only had alcohol. Yeah, this was
it was
the
all alcohol. It was like a table full of alcohol. And I'm like,
I did I did this when I first moved to Moscow. I rented a room in a two-room apartment, and it was the first time I had my own place, not fully place, but like a room. And there was no furniture there, and I bought this IKEA table. I remember that it cost $999, which in today's, like if we use today's exchange rate, it would be like $10. It was just plywood and foldable legs, and the plywood was not covered with any polish or anything. And so I had this idea that I'm gonna draw the alcohol consumed at this table on the surface of the table.
right.
Uh, and I actually, like, I mean, I tell this story to people all the time because this is like, I talk to people who don't know, who are jealous of me in terms of my work trajectory. Like, I actually like what I do. I have freedom in doing what I'm doing, and they ask, "How did you achieve that?" And if you look at the chain of events, that's where it starts. I drew alcohol bottles on the surface of the table that I consumed the alcohol at because you did not give me the job I applied to, though my resume was very in line with the job I was applying for. Instead, your attention was targeted towards this video of me drawing alcohol bottles. And from there, we
Yeah.
decided you wanted some visuals for a talk you were about to give. I learned how to make cartoons.
Yeah.
I made a cartoon, and then we did a lot of different things. But like it starts with there were two elements. First, I drew those alcohol bottles, and that's an act of pure creativity. There was no part of me that ever thought that this would lead to anything. This is just something fun to do. And then the other is I took your Buddhism and modern spirituality course, or Buddhism and modern psychology course. And if
On
if not that, then we would
on
not have
Coursera at
connected
that
either.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was you had done that when you first made contact with me, right? That's how I got on your
Right.
radar
That's
screen. Yeah.
that's how I find out you exist. So
So
like me being where I am now professionally rests upon drawing alcohol and being interested in Buddhism. So it's like my
yeah.
advice when people ask me about, how do you have a work trajectory like yours, I say you got to do shit that is actually interesting to you in the spare time, and like you don't know what's going to happen if you do things that you think are interesting. If you don't do them, the chances are the dull trajectory is going to continue.
Yeah, because the alcohol thing did get my attention. It's hard to describe, but it's a great piece of work. And I think that's the reason I wanted to stay in touch and do some projects, and that wound up to you actually
Mm.
working at the newsletter. And then that led to your current gig with Glenn. And the rest is history. And here we are. You've already pointed to one kind of difference between our sensibilities, which is that you are fundamentally an artist. I think in a pretty full sense of the word, and I'm not. Um,
Your words, so I'll take it.
well, what would you call yourself? Uh,
I mean, I do. I started using that term after John Horgan started calling me. He would write Russian psychedelic artist / writer,
Mm-hmm.
and I never would think of applying those words to myself as like this is, I think I'm a writer, I think I'm an artist. But once other people start doing that as a way to describe what happens, like I do write and I do draw, so okay, if that's called artist and that's called a writer, then I'm fine with that.
And we should say quickly for people who aren't up on your recent past, you left Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. You and your wife are elsewhere, and I think you're going to land in Spain next year. It's a little nomadic, but
That's the plan. Don't
okay.
have tickets. We have an apartment that's booked starting in middle of January, but we haven't figured out the logistics because we're traveling with a dog, and that's complicated.
That does complicate things. Um, so yeah, the artistic sensibility is one difference, but there's a kind of really oblique commonality, I think, between our missions. I'm not sure you'd say you have a mission aside from doing art, but maybe we can get to that. But anyway, it's that. So as you know, I've got this whole thing about the importance of humankind transcending its tribal psychology as a prerequisite for not like turning the world into a complete disaster from which we might never recover. Um, and there's something, and you, of course, have written, very, coherently and well. In fact, the aforementioned John Horgan, that was one of the first compliments he paid you in talking to me. Was he said the
Hmm.
writing you do about psychedelics is up there with like the known writers about psychedelics, and I don't know, I guess Terence McKenna and so on. But there is something. I mean, would you agree? There's something in the psychedelic sensibility that naturally transcends tribalism. Of course, there's a whole range of drugs we talk about and call psychedelics, and perhaps too many. But I'm thinking about the classic, kind of like LSD experience, right? It's a little bit like Anthropologist from Marsy.
I think so, though I'm kind of hesitant to like describe the qualities of the trips as if this is what the drug does, because I think it does different things to different
It
people.
does, but there can be a
And
kind of detachment. You know what I mean? Which actually I
yes,
think distinguishes it from marijuana in a way.
marijuana can do that too.
It can
I
do
mean,
it, but well, anyway, we can maybe get into drugs later. Um, the I don't mean actually take them, although
I wish.
you got to have some kind of bait for paid subscriptions, I guess. The So I don't know. Now people should. I don't actually. There are definitely people in the Zoom room. I don't see any raised hands yet. That may be because I don't know what I'm looking for. But feel free if you have something you want to say
There we go.
or
Lewis raised a hand.
oh, okay. So Lewis has raised Lewis's hand, and the way this works is, as I understand it, I now ask you to unmute, and that gives you permission to unmute. You will not be visible, we've decided, because we're not sure everyone would obviously understand that this is also a YouTube live stream that will stay on YouTube and so on. So for now, it's like talk radio. We won't be able to see you, but I'm going to ask Lewis to unmute, and then Lewis is going to say something, we hope.
Hey, Lewis.
Perfect. There we go. Thanks a lot. Sorry if it's a little off topic compared to what you were just talking about, but it was just a question I had. Bob, you've spoken at length in the past on how the U.S. should evolve along a non-zero context in regards to its foreign policy, and lately about Israel. And Nikita, in the past, you've joined conversations about how Russia should be approached. I'm curious though, lately there's, at least in my mind, there's been a lot of interesting developments with India and their presence on the global stage. If you both somehow found yourself in a position of contributing to these policy decisions, how do you think the West should exert influence, and develop relations with an increasingly developed and also polarized India?
Whoa. That wasn't on my list of, my assiduous preparation for this conversation. Stayed up late studying, didn't Google India. Nikita, would you like to start off with some thoughts about India? Look, I don't have strong thoughts. My general approach to foreign relations is to try to stay on good terms with all nations, which I think involves not spending too much time preaching about their domestic politics, which I think has been counterproductive. By and large, it doesn't even achieve the goals of the people who think we should try to shape domestic policies on human rights or whatever. In the case of India, the thing I would preach about, if my ideology didn't discourage that, is, of course, the kind of ethno-nationalist character of it, the kind of Hindu nationalist thing. And Modi's history is, I would say somewhat checkered past in terms of things he says and does about Muslims. But I don't have a special recipe. I think I would say India's viewed by America as, among other things, a possible counterbalance to China, and that would figure less in my calculations. And so it's not like, so I wouldn't be like moving heaven and earth and making big sacrifices to stay on good terms with India because it can counterbalance China, I guess. For example, I think, I forget which administration, did a major transfer of nuclear technology, which was, a big favor. And I think that was for these kind of geostrategic reasons that I would pay less attention to. But God knows I'm not an expert in India.
I'm
Nikita,
sure I'm
no thoughts have emerged. Ravi Shankar, I met Ravi Shankar. Do you know that?
I think you might have mentioned that.
I always I mention all the important people I've met, and I act
Henry
as if
Kissinger.
I'm on a first name basis. Oh, Ravi and I, it's unbelievable. So there's another raised hand. You think I should go ahead and ask to unmute? But thank you for that, Lewis. I'm sorry if I don't have deeper insights. I'll study up. And here comes Ken. I just gave you permission, I think, to unmute, Ken.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. First of all, I came through your evolutionary psychology course, and I want to thank you for that. It was a groundbreaker for me. But I want to ask
the Buddhism course.
Yes, okay. Buddhism and modern psychology. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Not evolutionary psychology, modern psychology. But you can see where my latest interests are in psychology from an evolutionary standpoint. But if we can use mindfulness to transcend the genetically and culturally evolved self, drive to ourself, to overcome the self, why can we not use that same process to overcome the coalitionary impulses that we have, us, them, we have to defeat them, etc., that have also evolved into our species, both genetically and culturally? Why do we have to, do you really think that resorting to chemicals is an answer? Although I know that sounds like a prejudice on my part, but there is a slight prejudice there. But there is mindfulness on the part of people who are engaging in our international processes, and somehow a way to perhaps subliminally find a way to get normal, regular people who won't be practicing a mindful practice to start backing away from that coalitionary impulse that's evolved into our species.
Well, before I turn this over to our expert on mind-altering chemicals, for that part, were you saying at first, like, can mindfulness help not only dissolve the sense of self, or whatever you want to say about the whole not self issue, but address the kind of coalitional divisions, the tribalism? Is that, or did I misunderstand you?
Yeah. Yes, precisely.
Okay. Absolutely. They're like one and the same to some extent. and I would say, yeah, I mean, it almost inherently happens, and I have limited experience with letting go of the self. But when I've come closest to it, like at meditation retreats, it naturally happens that you also feel less tightly tied to whatever tribe you may have belonged to. I would say not all tribes, not the human tribe, not benign tribes maybe, but kind of tribes that might be involved in conflict. The other thing I'd say is that, I think, as I've written about occasionally in the newsletter, there are cognitive biases that I think don't get as much attention as they deserve. And one of the main ones that sustains coalitional conflict is called attribution error. And it consists in, just quickly, like if there's an enemy of yours and they do something bad, you attribute it to their fundamental character, their essence. If they do something good, you write it off as a, passing, it's due to some temporary circumstance, not really reflecting their character. With your friends and allies, and with you, it's the opposite. We do good things because that's the kind of people we are. We do bad things because we didn't get our nap or whatever, or we're trying to, we were trying to impress people and whatever. I think that's a very underrated cognitive bias in importance. It helps get wars started and so on. And I maintain that mindfulness, to some extent, when it works, naturally erodes that kind of cognitive bias. And maybe you can kind of, I think it's significant that it works the same way on you and your friends, allies, tribe mates, right? The cognitive bias has you all in the same category: people who do good things because that's the way you are, and bad things only because of transient circumstances. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. And I've in places, I think, been explicit about that. It's one of my big hopes. Now, mindfulness meditation isn't for everybody, and it's not the only way to address these cognitive biases. I do think, though, a kind of separate but related value of it is it can make you aware of how subtle and stubborn the cognitive biases are, how kind of inconspicuously our feelings shape our thoughts and steer them in a particular direction. The so-called cognitive biases, I think, tend to begin with feeling, not cognition per se. Cognition gets warped, but they're not just cognitive in their nature. So that's probably enough from me on that. Nikita would now like to share some thoughts on how psychedelics can save the world, or not, as he
Okay,
says.
so first off, I am not advocating people taking psychedelics. Just, I'm not propagandizing it. I think people should have a right to do so. I think it's a pretty dark situation that we have right now, where these substances are criminalized and you're put in a cage if you're found having some LSD on you. This, to me, this is akin to the prohibition of certain books in the Soviet Union. Like, I think there are actually like quite a few similarities, parallels between the two situations. This is like, if you're thinking of the Soviet Union in the 70s or something, if you're the kind of person who wants to read Orwell, you're probably going to be able to find some, because you're going to know a guy who knows a guy, and you're going to have to do it. Like my mother told me, I think it was Orwell, I think it was 1984, that she had to read in a night because the copy was not given out. People wouldn't just let you borrow it. And so the way she read Orwell was, the men were playing cards in one room throughout the night, and she had that night to read the book in a different room. So she was just given this, samizdat Orwell, and she had 12 hours or whatever to go through it. That sounds like a psychedelic experience to me. Like you're engaging with this information that is normally unavailable. It's like psychoactive. That's why it's prohibited by the state, because you might start thinking things you're not supposed to be thinking. It's changing your mind. This is what the text can do. And the same thing can be said about psychedelics. Like, I remember when I did LSD for the first time, I was in Moscow in my apartment, and I remember like a few hours in, this thought of, wait, this is what people are put in jail for? Like, I'm sitting here thinking about cognition and the place of humankind on Earth, and how does mind work and perception, and I'm just curious about existence. This is what puts you in jail? That I'm definitely against. I am not at the same time saying that people should just take these drugs, because they work differently on different people. For some, it's going to be useful. For others, it's going to be risky. Some people can get harmed by these experiences. And mindfulness meditation, I think, is much safer. I think that actually also is not like foolproof. I think there are cases where a person gets really into meditation, and it can lead you, like, I've known people who are deep into meditation and then they end up with some kind of a breakdown, the dark night of the soul, they would call it. And they would tell me that this is a good thing. It's a part of the path. You go through this difficult experience, but you emerge a better person. Looking from the outside, not everybody emerges as a better person, but I think it's generally much safer than psychedelics, and a lot of people can benefit from it. The thing about like transcending our, not just us transcending these associations with our tribes, but like the premise of the question was, if I understood it correctly, how we can use these practices to like solve conflict. What if people who are calling the shots were a little more mindful? I think there are a lot of assumptions here. I don't like, who are the people, who's going to meditate to have fewer wars in the world? I don't think the world leaders that we have now are necessarily interested in having less conflict. Like, my sense is a lot of these world leaders are fine with wars. Like the way I and people around me were shocked when Russia attacked Ukraine, and the devastation that happened afterwards. I don't think everybody thinks that way. And I think the higher you climb in the hierarchies of these states, the more likely you are to be kind of okay with making the decision for people to die.
But I'd say that one reason they so often make the decision is because there's public support for it, and because it's so easy to stir up public support for it. So if there were more people at the grassroots level who resisted these calls and saw things more clearly and less tribally, then I think political leaders, I'm at least as cynical as you are. I think by and large, all they want is power. And if stoking conflict is a route to that, that's what they'll do. But if suddenly everyone in their country is Gandhi, they'll be like, yeah, peace, love, and understanding, if that's what keeps them in power. Anyway, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I was just voicing my frustration. This, like, these past couple of years have been rough, and I've been going through stages of like changing perspective, and I haven't arrived at some kind of a conclusion yet, but I'm drifting further into kind of cynicism as it relates to states and governments and the order that we have in the world on the political stage, and more focusing on like the very premise of like, let's come up with a solution. Here's how we're going to save the world. I'm just like emotionally have been drifting away from that and closer to, let me try to figure out how I can help people around me. Let me try to figure out how I can connect with somebody in front of me, or subscribers of my newsletter or whatever, just in my vicinity. And it might be not for a good reason. It might be just a kind of maybe I'm trying to protect myself from how overwhelming it feels when you think about these big problems and you don't have a solution. But my drift generally lately has been in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have some other raised hands, and we'll get to them. I want to. Well, I'll save this thought. It's relevant, but also somebody asked via comment. Will Bob have Sam Harris on his podcast in the near future? I'm happy to. It's Sam's mad at me. I'm not mad at Sam. Sam, ever since I wrote the piece in Wired about him, which I encourage people to Google if you're wondering why he might have had a negative reaction to it. He's officially he wants to have nothing further to do with me. I, on the other hand, am open to communication with all beings, with the possible exception of a few I can think of. So Francis has had their hand raised, and we will now ask Francis to unmute. Oops.
Hey, Francis.
Yeah, hi guys. Bob, your work interests me in particular because starting from a very simple premise that I want to understand the world I live in. I want to see it accurately for a simple reason, which is it basically, that's my guide to what I'm going to do. I want to know what's around me. I want to sort of get it right, not because of any great passion about the truth, but because I want to make my way around in this world. And if I get it right, I will kind of know, what to do next. And when I get it wrong, it'll correct me or slap me in the face, or I'll pay a price for it in some way. So the way I see your, cognitive empathy commitment and the things you were just saying about cognitive biases would be, you are talking about methods for increasing your chances of getting the world right. Cognitive empathy. Start thinking about what the other person might be thinking. And you might come up with an action or a behavior in which things will tend to go better rather than to go worse, tend to not create friction, conflict, impact, and so on. All right. Now, two big areas that have accelerated my, interest in your newsletter, for example, would be the war in Ukraine and now, of course, Gaza. And here, if we go back to the premise, I want to get the world right so that I know what I am going to do next. Mm-hmm. And of course, implied in there is the idea of values. What am I going to do next? Has a lot to do with my values. Look at the world, try to get it right. What do? I'm going to act on the basis of values that I hold. Okay. I was an academic in the United States for 40 years. I just retired. I now live in Germany.
What discipline, just out of curiosity?
Medieval literature.
Okay.
Also Caribbean literature, so I just want to put for the contemporary connection there.
Okay.
Because I grew up in the Caribbean. And I now live in Germany, and I in the next 60 seconds, I'll try to wrap this up. In the next 60 seconds, the challenge is to try to communicate how I feel the world has gone off a cliff. My starting point was 2003. There can be many starting points, but the war in Iraq was my starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the elephant in the room that I feel I cannot begin to get more than a finger onto this elephant. How is it that United States, with its incredible intellectual as well as economic resources. I mean, I'm a university professor. I know what my colleagues do. I went to, conferences. I know people who are passionate about small things and work on them really hard. I know people who are passionate about big things and work on them really hard, trying to get it right. But with the Ukraine war and this Gaza thing, and basically what I'm saying is we're watching a genocide in front of us, it's happening in front of us as if it's not happening. How can these mighty European countries, with all their resources and all their cognitive tools, yes, their academies, how can it be that, for example, your newsletter is one small voice of sanity? That there are almost everybody I listen to or pay attention to is not on any recognized media outlet. So yes, that's enough.
I'd say, I mean, first of all, I think if you do get deeply into evolutionary psychology, it's actually not so shocking. I mean, people, it isn't that people are tribal per se. I mean, big tribes weren't part of human evolution, really. The social organizations were much smaller, but we are designed, but coalitional conflict, even within like a hunter-gatherer village or whatever, had real stakes, real resources. So it's like, the mind is not designed to fundamentally to view the world clearly or to do good things. It's strictly speaking, the mind, the brain of every organism is designed to get genes into the next generation. So you wouldn't expect us to be angels. None of that surprises me. I wouldn't, I'd love, well, in a way, I'd like to say that, yes, the Nonzero Newsletter is the only voice of sanity or close to that. But, there are a lot of people, I mean, maybe with Gaza more than Ukraine, who are speaking up and saying things. I will say that in both cases, the United States was supporting the side that, if you just start paying attention, like right then, is the one that got attacked, right? So it's not crazy that, I mean, Putin invaded Ukraine. Most people haven't been paying attention to the last 20 years and asking whether a more sane U.S. foreign policy would have successfully integrated Russia into the West, which I think it could have. And in any event, when somebody invades another country, like, that's not good, and of course, October 7th, horrible atrocities. So it's like, I'm not maybe as shocked to begin with as you are, but this leads to and again, the problems are stubborn. The psychology of tribalism is a subtle thing. It leads to something I wanted to say to Nikita about I alluded to the fact that there's something you do with your newsletter that I wish I had a more natural inclination toward. And it's because, I would like to think that I'm doing a better job of kind of mobilizing people in some sense to help do something about this. And I don't really know how to do that. Now, you are not a mobilizer. As you just said, it's like you are not starting a crusade to save the world. However, you do naturally encourage engagement with your newsletter and collaboration in ways that I don't naturally do. I was just like a journalist, a writer for my life. You sit in a room alone, you talk to people to gather information. You do have this instinct, and you see it in Psychopolitica. First of all, to find people who share your aesthetic sensibility in some sense and have them actually contribute. Some of them are professionals. I mean, they're not just readers. They're people whose work you admire, and you get them to help you do stuff. But that's, and I'd be curious if readers of Nonzero Newsletter have ideas about how you do more in the way of mobilization. I'm not by nature really an activist or a movement starter, but somebody needs to be mobilizing people. And there are people, again, there are people who are active on these fronts, but it's kind of more is
What do
better.
you want to mobilize people for?
You need to, I just think almost no one is taking seriously the magnitude of the challenge and the stakes. It's like, and maybe I'm wrong, I just think the problems I've described are very stubborn. Like overcoming these cognitive biases enough that humankind doesn't remain mired in tribal conflict both internationally and domestically. I mean, America is it's the closest to civil war in my lifetime. Not that close to actual civil war, but the closest in my lifetime. And my contention, somebody asked, and I actually know this person. I think I know why they asked, but for my thoughts on artificial intelligence and foreign relations. And I am actually now writing a book on AI. I know I keep saying I'm writing books about things. What I announced I was writing a book on cognitive empathy, and I had a book contract. I wasn't making it up. Now I have a 2-book contract with the same publisher, and AI is the first book I'm going to write because I think it really heightens the challenge. I think AI, it has huge possible upside, and it has tremendous possible downside in terms of just social turbulence, personal, it's going to make social media look like a day at the beach, and we still haven't figured out how to handle social media. I think along a lot of dimensions, it's going to be a real challenge. And by its nature, it's something we cannot govern wisely in a tribalized world. A lot of people pointed out you have to have some degree of international governance. You can't do that in the world as it exists right now. And you need to be able to do coherent legislation at the national level. You can't do that in America right now. So I think AI just heightens the challenge that I'm personally persuaded is a huge one.
Let me try saying something that I haven't thought out yet. So we're talking about a bunch of different things here, and one of them is what is the problem? One of the ways the problem is formulated is we have these cognitive biases and association with our tribes, and that leads us to be okay with like war because we want our tribe to be winning and this kind of thing. I get that, but and like meditation might help with that. I get that, but my feeling is a broader kind of way to formulate the issue is most of us, most of the time, are kind of sleepwalking whatever the topic of the conversation is. Like one of the first things that I always notice when I renew my meditation practice, so I'm not meditating regularly right now. I've had periods where I did, and I'm sure there will be another one. But when I start meditating regularly after a break, one of the first things I notice is just how little awareness I have. Like the exercise is supposed to be just focus on the breath. When you realize that you're distracted, you know that you come back to the breath.
Mm-hmm.
The way that happens, especially at first, is you sit there and you focus on the breath, and then at some point you realize that you haven't been focused on the breath and you don't know for how long.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've been. So in that, if that is predicament, yeah, you can't even do the simple thing of just following your breath. Not only can do that, when you realize you've been distracted, you don't know when that happened, how long you've been thinking about other things, what was the first thing that got you distracted. Or a similar thing, one of the exercises I also do when I do meditate regularly is before sleep, I go through the day, what happened in the day sequentially. And again, especially when it's like early after the break, there are like hours missing. Like I remember the breakfast, I remember what I did after that, and I don't have all the hours that were supposed to be in this day. I don't know what I did between 2 and 4 or something. That is very, immediately available, that recognition of how lost you are, how distracted you are. With these big issues, I don't think we are. Most of us are really, we don't know what it is that we're trying to solve. If we're trying to solve something, we don't know where our opinions come from. You follow your sources online. You get, we're very little educated about what's going on in the world. This war stuff, we've been so shocked with Russia, Ukraine, and so appalled at the devastation. Meanwhile, it took me like I don't think earlier than this year I was even aware that there was a war, like one of the maybe the biggest war in the latest decades were like 2020 to 2022 in Africa. This conflict is just, it was not in the news that I follow, and so I was not aware of it. We're I think most of us are kind of floating down the river of whatever happened to be our circumstance. And we worry about the issues that are around us. Most of us are not doing anything about those issues. Like, we can get angry and write a thing on social media. Who in the Zoom room sat down and rented an office and with a whiteboard and tried to like solve the Ukraine war? We don't do that. We have our jobs and we have our day. And so my feeling is the issue at hand is like much more fundamental, which is we're not in control of our lives, our cognition, our choices, the things we do day to day. Most of them are, you just have to do what you do on Tuesdays. You have this job and you go to the office and you do the thing. And there's very little active, aware, trajectory that we really are sure of. This is what I'm trying to do. This is why, and I'm effective at it. This is my feeling.
Yeah. You mentioned that we're sleepwalking through life, and I think well, first of all, we are by and large. I mean, there's that great line in Our Town, the play by Thornton Wilder, as I recall. So the girl has died. She's viewing her own family from the afterlife, and she's just noting that there were all these amazing things, these great, beautiful things she just didn't pay attention to. And she's seeing people who aren't paying attention to them, like I think her own family. And she says, people are in little boxes, and
Right.
that's right. And I think one thing, well, in a way, two things that can be common to the psychedelic and the meditative experience, although both of those have all kinds of different manifestations. There are different kinds of meditative traditions. Somebody in the comment wrote a comment about how different the Sufi tradition is. Yeah, I mean, there are dances that induce ecstatic experience. That's a different kind of, kind of bodily, spiritual practice. And there are tons of kinds of meditation. In Tibet, it's big to kind of try to visualize these imaginary things. And for that matter, if you just sit down and try to do mindfulness meditation, you can have lots of kind of experiences. I mean, I only once, because it was so extraordinary, I think, on my first retreat, had like a psychedelic, like it was a trip. Like, I was in another realm. But there's another thing I would point to in terms of commonality between meditation and psychedelic experience. And I think both can make you aware that normally you're sleepwalking, right? And that itself has oh wait, now I'm getting a comment about Arnold Clean. I have to write these down because they disappear. I guess there's a place uh
You can scroll through them.
yeah. But yeah, well, this one is I found irritating. I'm not irritated at the person, but I'm irritated by what they report somebody wrote about me. But being the master of meditative practice, I am. I'll transcend. The there's two dimensions of realizing you're sleepwalking. I think one is to look around the world and go, oh God, this is beautiful. I could just like stare at this flower or at this, or it's something that I don't normally categorize as beautiful, and it's amazing. That can happen both as a result of meditation and psychedelics, I think. And then the other thing is the kind of, I think you can actually make the observation about other people and about yourself that, yeah, people are in boxes. You know, you can like see it happening. You can observe the process of having like very narrow kind of, you know, self-preoccupied vision. So I don't know where that leaves us. There are, I mean, maybe I should open up the comments box, but there's also somebody identified as iPad, possibly not their real name. I mean, it's possible there's somebody named lowercase I, capital P, lowercase AD, but we'll find out. I'm gonna now give them wait, if I can give them permission to unmute. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Are you
Hi,
iPad?
my name is George. Sorry. Yeah, this is iPad. I guess I
Oh.
don't know how to set that. This is a constant theme that I see in a lot of your discussions, which I really enjoy in how political and scientific. I'm a synthetic organic chemist, and how scientific yet political your discussions are, and I really enjoy that. One that always bothers me a little bit, and I thought the way today's discussion started it kind of highlights that. In that, first of all, I firmly believe that we should be loosening our laws in terms of access to recreational drugs, whatever that means. But we obviously need some safety limits, and government plays a role here. What I can't help but notice is you guys seem to have a lot of confidence in kind of understanding how psychedelic drugs affect your consciousness. And as a chemist, one thing that's really clear to me is that there's no good mechanistic explanation for this, right? So if this was a similar genetic argument, Bob would be going through the roof saying you guys aren't making any sense. But in terms of from the chemistry point of view, just when we think about where the drugs hit in terms of receptors, our understanding of the mind just doesn't link there. So there's this big gap. And then why it kind of showed up to me is like when the conversation started when you talked about when you first met, I kind of interpreted maybe a negative interpretation of from a hiring point of view of his association with alcohol. And it's really hard for me as a chemist to think about different cognitive experiences associated with being inebriated from a psychedelic versus alcohol in terms of actual connections, right? And I think this was, I think 100 years ago, people would have talked about mystical experiences after a bender or things like that. And I think probably the biggest difference is that to get to that level with alcohol, you actually the next day have great regret, which doesn't seem to happen as much with, let's say, LSD. And so I was just wondering how you guys think about that. Is that something you're sort of aware of? So often I've seen Bob interview people, and these people who take MRIs of the brain and things like that. There's no real connection with our understanding of the physical locations versus, let's say, the chemical interactions beyond just sort of more active, less active, and things like that. And so I was just wanting you guys to think about that more broadly in that regard. And I'm unmuting.
Do you
or muting.
So my understanding has been that there is a certain amount of knowledge that we've been able to uncover of how these things work. Like, let's say with mushrooms, people point to these scans where the different areas of the brain that are usually not working together are working together when you're in the middle of the trip. So there's more overlap between the different areas of the brain. And I can see how that makes sense from a subjective perspective of having been in these experiences. But I don't really occupy myself very much with the scientific, like I don't need to know exactly the chemical underpinnings of what is happening. I can just have the experience and then see whether it's useful or not and what kind of insights it brings, if any. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever claimed to understand how these things work. I can just report my experiences and share thoughts or perceptions that I've had during them, but I don't think I ever claim to have a knowledge of how this works from the biological chemical perspective. It works. That is for sure. Unlike many of these practices, these things work pretty reliably. This was like McKenna's argument against the skeptics. Like somehow they never have the 15 minutes to invest. People say the DMT entities that you meet there, this is not reality. This is just hallucination. You don't know what you're talking about. And you go, well, do you have half an hour? Because you can get there. This works reliably. This is not, you don't need to sweep the ashram for 30 years to maybe have an experience. This is right there. You can have the experience, then you can share our thoughts with us. And generally people who are very skeptical of the psychedelic perspective don't want to invest that half hour into investigating what the conversation is about.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think that we understand how these things work or really how meditation works. I mean, we know some things that seem to happen during meditation, like during, mindfulness meditation, the so-called default mode network, which is the part of your brain activated when you're daydreaming, seems to get quieter. And that makes sense, given the subjective experience. But I think, it can be useful in both cases to just assess the subjective experience and try to analyze it and so on. But that's not really science when you're doing it yourself. I mean, if you amass a bunch of reports, it can become kind of scientific about subjective experience. But no, I don't think we know that much. Nikita, I want to second what you said about the dark night of the soul. People do have those kinds of experiences with meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't say, but it worked out in the end. I mean, sometimes on retreats, rarely, but occasionally, they have a very bad experience and they just wish they hadn't gone. And certainly that's true with psychedelics, kind of famously. I do think I'd caution people more about doing psychedelics casually than going to a meditation retreat, because, as you said, Nikita, I think it's less perilous to go to a meditation retreat, but you shouldn't go without some sense of commitment to it. So let's see, there's a number of kind of written comments, including, I'll get the annoying one out of the way. Arnold Kling released a Substack this morning describing me as, quote, justifying the Russian invasion. I have so many times explicitly said that's not what I'm doing and why. When I tried to distinguish between explaining why something happened and justifying it. Although that again is actually, that's another part of human nature that complicates the resolution and avoidance of conflicts, is that we all, it can complicate it and actually can play a constructive role, but we do naturally conflate the two things. If you start explaining why the sequence of events that led somebody to do something bad, I just naturally say, oh, so you're justifying it? And you might rightly say, no, I'm just explaining why it happened. They should still go to jail. They broke the law. I'm just saying there's a reason it happened. So yeah, that's the thing that, and I do know Arnold Kling, and I have to say I'm disappointed. I mean, it's hard to believe because he has professed to be a reader of Nonzero Newsletter. So I'm kind of surprised and disappointed. But thanks for that question. Somebody recommends John Haidt's The Righteous Mind. Yes, I agree. Just the fact that our brain lies to us. I don't buy all of John's kind of moral foundations theory stuff, but that fact, yes. Maybe putting Prozac in the water supply, somebody suggests. I'm not sure I'm ready to embrace that. There's a question about the evolution of God. I don't want to spend too much time on my stuff, except to say thank you for being aware that I do mention the logos in that, and this is from Nicholas, says, I have found it very difficult to read further on this topic. Yeah, there's not that much on the logos. I mean, Jordan Peterson uses the word, but I don't know what he's talking about. It is hard to, I'm trying to think if there are any suggestions on what might provide a broader lens on the idea. Well, there are different versions of it. You know, Philo's idea of the logos was, this kind of logic governing history almost, and he saw it as a manifestation of divinity. And little known fact is that in the book of John, when it says in the beginning was the word word is a translation of the Greek word logos. So it meant a lot more than word to the author of the book of John. Okay, so we have another raised hand from Douglas. Take it away, Douglas.
Hi, this is a question for Nikita. I'm a Canadian retired engineer, work for a Chinese company, and my colleagues recently exhibited in Moscow water filtration systems, and their perception was that the city and the population, at least within Moscow, seemed to be invigorated, more energized than their previous visits. Is that consistent with what you're hearing from Moscow?
I'll answer, but can you expand on the term energized, invigorated? Like energized by what, and invigorated in which direction?
Well, commercially, restaurants, taxis, hotels, it did not appear to them to be in a depressed position or in a war-torn, certainly not a war-torn position. Just seemed like a normal, vibrant commercial center.
So what I've heard, I haven't been in Russia since August of last year, I guess, August, September, but I have family and friends there. And what I'm hearing from them, but also from, like, I was listening to some like economic expert describing the situation, the cafes and the restaurants are actually doing better than before. And part of the explanation that I'm hearing, both from these kind of experts, but more importantly to me on a subjective level, like from people I know, is there's a sense of let's get drunk, let's party, because there's not an understanding of what happens next. So there is a sense that the previous way is over with the beginning of the war, and the country is going through some kind of metamorphosis. There are a lot of like dark, grim news that are just, there's a like an absurdity element to it. There is, you're constantly reading these news that add up to a vision of a world that just doesn't make sense. Things don't add up. There's I don't know if I'm gonna be able to give a lot of examples, but like last night I remember reading this thing. 4 people got injured. By today, one of them is dead. By a big block of ice fell down on a queue into a military office. So the people, the men outside are waiting to get into a military office. Some of them are being drafted. Some of them need to update their papers and whatnot. And just a block of ice falls on their heads. One of them died by today. And like, these are small, this probably doesn't sound like anything to you. To me, this like adds up to a world where you've got lessons about Russia's place in the world and why we need to fight the Nazis in Ukraine that are being done in schools. Some of this seeps into the kindergartens. There's a ramping up of the propaganda that goes beyond anything that it's not just like patriotism. It's not just what we're doing is right, but people talk about dropping the nuclear bomb on Washington and stuff like that. There's an over-the-top quality to the discourse. And then the economic reality it's not what people feared at the beginning. People thought the economic system is going to collapse. It hasn't. No, the country continues to survive and to work, and even Coca-Cola is still in the stores. It just comes into the country from Iran. But there's definitely no security. People don't know what's going to happen next year. Any kind of long-term planning has been thrown out of the window. And so in that circumstance, you have your job, you can continue go about your business. The war is not where you are. The war is in Ukraine. And so you do get your salary. You can't make long-term plans. You're not gonna like, I'm gonna buy this apartment because I know that this is the city I want to live in. And I know how my life is going to look like 10 years from now. So you go and you drink and you eat and you try to just have a good today without knowing what the next year is going to be like. This is my sense.
Thank you.
Nikita, somebody in chat. First of all, somebody recommends what I guess is a book called Logos Rising by E. Michael Jones. If you're interested in that. Apparently somebody on YouTube chats wants to know our thoughts on nuclear weapons disarmament. I don't consider it the most urgent priority. Personally, I think, I mean, reducing the number of nuclear weapons would be great. You could get conceivably to such a low level that you start to worry about the logic of deterrence no longer applying and actually get more insecure, but we're nowhere near that point. But in any event, that has seemed to be fairly stable as long as a relatively small number of nations have nuclear weapons. So far, deterrence has worked. I'm not assuming anything, but I'm not assuming it'll work forever. But I think in terms of near-term disasters, a more likely source is a genetically engineered bioweapon, possibly something in space that has cascading effects on the whole communications infrastructure, and so on. In any event, I think we shouldn't freak out about the fact that China is building up its nuclear arsenal. It's nowhere near the size of ours. China shows no signs of being crazy. I think it wants to make sure that it has an ample nuclear deterrent of its own. Now, ideally, yeah, we'd have an agreement that led certainly us and Russia and to reduce our stockpiles and China not to build its up. But I think stopping nuclear proliferation is important to make sure the stray nuke doesn't get in the hands of a crazy person. So that's me on that. There's a deep philosophical question about reconciling what Guy, Guy is the person's name, is calling on the one end idealism, meaning drugs, Buddhism, indigenous traditions, and on the other materialism, selfish gene, and so on, I guess meaning my evolutionary psychology worldview. I don't really make that distinction. I mean, in general, with evolutionary psychology and with Buddhism and with drugs, you have this mysterious fact that consciousness exists. It's like something to be alive. We can feel pleasure and pain, and that is correlated with what's going on in the physical body. I don't understand why that is or how it is, but I think it applies to all those dimensions. Nikita, you'll like this. Lewis says that a little tidbit I remember from an undergrad course, usually large societal shifts were precipitated by heightened alcohol consumption in the general population. By the way, is drinking up in Russia? Do you know? Is there?
I don't have the data, but again,
sounds like
I've heard that
as much. Yeah,
that the bars like are more alive than they used to be.
Okay, Lewis wants to know if there's a potential release date for book. Not yet, but thank you for asking.
Have you talked a lot about the AI book? And can you talk can you share what the thesis is? Because I only know that it has.
Well, it's a very cosmic look at AI. It gets back to this guy I wrote about in my first book, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, this Catholic
That's right.
Jesuit theologian mystic who basically pointed out that if you step back and look at the entire history of life, it looks at like what's going on is we're building a giant superorganism with a giant global brain. And this was a long time ago, but he was calling it a global brain. You know, he died in the 50s. And I think that is a very useful way to view evolution and in a way come to terms with the inexorability of it. The fact that all we can hope to do is govern it wisely. It's not like you can stop the revolution from happening. But and I think it does raise questions about larger purpose. Is there a purpose unfolding? And so on. But I think there are various advantages to kind of viewing AI as part of the ongoing construction of the global brain. And that helps in thinking about what kind of brain it'll be. It helps us, I think about really, do things to keep us from having a monstrous future. Now, here's, and we should probably, before too long, unless there are more questions, spoken questions. Here's another one from the chat, Nikita, that's more in your bailiwick. From Zachary, given the complexity regarding psychedelic experiences in a way that you can go back and reference them after the fact, i.e., descriptive notes that are understandable out of that experience, do either of you think AI, along with virtual reality, could ever truly replicate this accurately, individually meaningful, etc.?
I don't know about replicating the drugs that we have, but it can certainly produce experiences that would be like a drug. I think so AI, virtual reality, I think the third element to add here is some kind of a feedback loop between what you're experiencing, what you're seeing in your VR helmet, and what is happening in your body, like a thing that scans your brain or measures your blood pressure or something, electric activity. If you can, I think there are things like that. There are these meditation enhancers things I've never played with, but ostensibly that, allegedly you put this thing on your head, it does some kind of measures something, maybe electricity in your brain or something, and produces gives you some kind of feedback. So like if you get more agitated, it provides, I don't know, a sound or something, some kind of sensation. And so that is supposed to make meditation easier because you become more aware of the dynamics in your brain. You can imagine a more sophisticated version of that, which has more information to base the, whatever it produces on, but also instead of just making a sound or tactile sensation or something, it gives you this trip, this all-encompassing VR thing. I've played recently with a VR helmet. It's trippy. It's they're getting pretty good.
Is it
the one that I play with? Yeah, the latest version of the Quest. There are two things that were weird and kind of stuck with, well, a few. One was, so this version has cameras on the outside,
right?
And you can, like the one that Apple is going to release sometime soon, so you can switch off the VR and you just see through the helmet into your everyday reality, but you're seeing an image through the camera, so it's a little wonky, it's a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And just that perception is just spooky. If you stay in that helmet for an hour or two and take it off, reality feels weird. You're not sure whether it's reality or it's on the same ontological level as the one you were experiencing just now in this helmet. There are, and they, it's engaging. And I was doing this. I have this very tiny space here. Another thing you can do is, before you go into a game, you look around at your surroundings, and the thing learns how much space there is available. So then if you're playing a game, the movement that is required of you to play the game is going to be limited to what is available to you. So you're not gonna, hit your elbow. And I have this very tiny space here, and the apartment is not in its best shape, and it's not like the future we were hoping for when watching sci-fi movies. And to go from a game in this VR helmet where I'm doing laser fights with robots, and it's expensive landscape that I'm in, and you do that for like a half hour or an hour, and then you take the headset off and you look around and you're like, this place is falling apart. The future that I imagined for these things is like where it's like heroin, the kind of stereotypical image of a heroin addict, and just he's laying on the mattress there. The room doesn't have anything in it, and this is his existence because what is for is the trip, is just being under the influence of this drug. I can imagine people wearing these helmets that are going to get smaller and more impressive while staying in shady apartments, huge apartment blocks, nothing, no furniture, and you're just playing these games in a VR space.
Yeah, I do think the combination of AI and virtual reality is going to draw people into something more and more like the metaverse. And I think AI may play two roles. I mean, first of all, it's going to create all these, non-playable characters or whatever, non-human, but human seeming in every sense of the word characters you interact with. But also AI may leave us with nothing better to do. I mean, if people, if it does, then it's the jury's out on whether, the advocates of universal basic income are right. And in the future, they're just going to not be all that much physical work, labor, blue collar, white collar. In fact, there may be more blue collar labor to be done for a while than white collar, but whether a lot of people are going to just be looking for things to do. And I was talking to a guy at Google the other day, and he said he was listening, one of these classic 20-something males living in their parents' basement, playing video games. And somebody said, hey, you could get a job at McDonald's. Why don't you get, and he's like, are you kidding? It's like in these video games, I'm like with my friends. It isn't just me in a video game. My actual friends in real life are participating. We're on the same team. We're getting the kind of gratification you'd get from being on a basketball team or winning a war. This is meaningful. Working at a McDonald's isn't. And
working at a McDonald's, I'm not sure has to be the case.
But
working at a McDonald's is not the alternative probably proposed to entice a person. Does anybody want to work at McDonald's?
Well, his point was he did not. And I don't know if McDonald's was actually the example, but the point is that you wouldn't even have to face no employment opportunities to find this preferable, of course. But anyway, I think that may happen. Now, somebody asked on YouTube in response to what I said about fearing some kind of cascading collapse of the communications infrastructure in outer space, asked, is space-based communications that critical to human survival? Well, first of all, I mean, apparently more than we realize, there are things like power plants that are dependent on some kind of communication with a satellite, some kind of GPS thing or something. But what I actually worry about more is, it gets back to nuclear weapons. If suddenly a country feels blinded, like suddenly all its surveillance satellites it uses to be sure that the other country isn't launching a nuclear attack go out, and it starts worrying that the other side did that intentionally, bad things can happen. So I just, transparency can have a stabilizing effect, the ability of two sides to see each other. And when that changes, you could, conceivably bad things could happen. So I think we may have, it's almost 90 minutes. So maybe this has been great. Thanks everybody who showed up. Thanks to Clark for being off stage and making sure that this all worked right. Nikita, do you want to say anything about the future of your newsletter? I mean, people should check Psychopolitica out for sure. It's unlike many other newsletters, including mine, I would say.
Future of Psychopolitica. Yeah, let me share. It's open-ended. The thing I'm doing now that gives me a lot of fulfillment is I invite subscribers to have a call with me. I like blocked out a few hours on 2 different days where people can just go to a page and schedule a Zoom call with me. And I've been doing this. I've maybe 10 people by now have had these conversations with me.
Are these one-on-one?
One-on-one. Anybody who wants to. I've done this at first in summer of previous year, and I'm now doing it kind of continuously. It's so exciting because I'm connecting with these people. Like I'm getting a kind of a sense of who my subscribers are, and instead of thinking of them as an audience, I'm thinking of them as individual people that I can connect with on this one-on-one direct kind of level. And it's just fascinating to see these people and see what kind of conversation we're going to have. There's like, I talked to a Serbian psychiatrist who worked for, I think, 7 years at what he described as an old-fashioned madhouse outside of Belgrade. And we had a nice conversation. It was an enjoyable conversation. We had a lot of things, shared interests that we were able to talk about. We spent like 90 minutes, I think. But I keep like telling people about this, not because of the contents of the conversation, but just the fact there is a Serbian psychiatrist. His name is Vuk Vukovic, which I think translates to something like Wolfowitz. Vuk is a wolf in Serbian. And he's there. And we spent an hour and a half together, and just the sense that there's this person that I am connected with in some way somehow makes life lighter. There's like that guy. There's a lady in Ireland who lives in the middle of nowhere with animals, and she's in her 50s, and we spent 40 minutes talking to one another. It felt like old friends. There are all of these different people, different characters who are real people who are going about their lives, who have things they think about and struggles of their own, and it helps me to connect with them, and I think they get something out of it. And so this is the kind of mindset that I'm currently in with Psychopolitica. I'm not. You talked about the mission. I don't have a mission. I'm shifting towards, let's see who is this group of people. I got like 7,500 subscribers. They must have something in common, something that I'm putting out, which is very eclectic and oftentimes weird, and it's sometimes political, and sometimes it's art, and sometimes it's stray thoughts. There's some kind of sensibility that I'm expressing there. Something resonates with them in it. Who are these people? And once I meet them, what do we want to do together? If we want to do anything together, what happens when we get connected in a more real way than just me putting something out and them reading it. So that's the mindset, and I am currently in a very open-ended phase of my life. Since we left Russia, there's no security or long-term plan. I'm right now in Armenia. By this time next month, I should be in Spain. Hopefully, we're gonna find an apartment and settle there for longer than we've been able to plan for so far. And once I do, what I'm dreaming of is we're going to have a nice empty apartment, and I'm going to be able to build myself a good working space. I'm going to have a comfortable chair, and I'm going to have a big desk. And with all that, all those riches, I want to try to do like a regular call-in show or something like what we're doing right now, but over at Psychopolitica, where I want to experiment with different genres. I want to to see, what kind of news show I would make, what kind of a group call I would make if we approached it as a kind of support group or an artist workshop, just play with different formats and genres. But I want to make what is now the audience into co-author. I want to see what happens if I just get connected with my audience, and if we do something together, if we talk to one another in a direct way. So that's the plan. If we are able to move, if we figure out the logistics, which are proven to be tricky, and if we find that apartment, and I do buy myself a desk, I want to have regular video, audio check-ins with the audience and turning the audience into a co-author of whatever it is that I'm doing at Psychopolitica.
Are you going to paint liquor bottles on the desk?
We'll see. Well, Spain has cannabis clubs. Do you know how they have this way that they sort of legalized cannabis that is very appealing to me on a kind of ideological, maybe the right word is, level, which is you can sell weed if you register a club, and you can only sell to your own members. And this is like presented as, this is just an infrastructure. We already have these people who smoke weed. Let's figure out a way for them to keep doing that without involving others. You're not allowed to advertise these things. If you have a community, go open a space, grow your own stuff, sell it to yourself, like to the people within your community. And apparently you're only allowed to smoke inside, which was a surprise to me. I went into a police station with some weed in my backpack, and they were not amused by that. I needed to get my paperwork done to be
How did
allowed
they
to
find
move
out
to
that you
Spain.
had weed in your backpack?
They decided to look. I did not expect that either. I had two trips to different police stations. One, nobody looked at any backpacks or anything. It was all very calm. And then
This
the
is in
other
Armenia.
one,
This is in Armenia?
no, this is Spain. This is
Oh,
Spain.
you were in Spain before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was going through this paperwork process of trying to get admission into the country. That's nomad visa.
So you thought you'd bring some marijuana into a police station to facilitate
Well,
the
it just
process.
so happened. I had it in, and then I had plans for the day. And the police was not amused, but I was so impressed with how non-threatening they were. They didn't try, I'm literally going into this police station to sort of ask, allow me to move to your country. And they're telling me, you're not supposed to have drugs on you when
So
you
it's
do that.
it's technically illegal, but they are trying to facilitate the
think the
social
idea-
use of it for people who want to use it.
Yeah, I think the idea is you're
It's
allowed to
decriminalized, probably, in
smoke
effect. Yeah.
smoke inside of those clubs.
I see.
And you're not allowed to have it even apparently outside, which doesn't make sense because the smallest amount you can buy is not what you would smoke in an evening at this club. But my understanding, yeah, you're
So
allowed
you
to
can
smoke in
buy
those
it
clubs.
legally. You can buy it legally at a retail outlet, but the police frown on you bringing it into a police station.
Yeah,
Well,
not consistent. Not
Spain,
consistent.
land of ironies. Sounds good. Well, and for my part, I want to have more things like this at the Nonzero Newsletter. This has been great, and get people's feedback, and continue to solicit advice on how to save the world. It's I'm glad things are working out for you. I mean, aside from the unfortunate fact that your country invaded Ukraine, and that led to all kinds of suffering, and a certain amount of dislocation for you. Although you've pointed out that that's nothing compared to the other kinds of suffering that are going on.
Yeah.
And but I'm glad you're thriving with a newsletter. You got this great gig with Glenn. and let's talk again, first of all, privately, but
Sure.
and let's both experiment with this stuff on our newsletters, and maybe compare notes and do another collaboration.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So I am gonna actually, I don't know how to stop this, but we hope that Clark is not falling asleep, because I think it may be in his hands. A number of people have said thank you in the comments. Thank you for saying thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Michael, for trying to make the Arnold Clean News not sound so bad in this note you just left. And I'm getting instructions. It says click more, stop a live stream. That's Clark. He hasn't fallen asleep. He's giving me guidance, even now. And so we're signing off. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for saying thanks. And take care to Nikita. And